Welcome. I'm your host, Henri and Austin, and welcome to this episode of the Future of Money podcast. As you guys know, my goal with this podcast is very simple. It's to go deep in some of the biggest ideas, trends, and developments we are seeing in the field of crypto, and hopefully empower you with this information, and then let you make your own decision on what their impact can be on the future of money and finance. And to do this, I invite each week one of the leading figures of the global crypto community to have this one-on-one conversation amongst crypto aficionados and discuss some of these topics. I also want to say, guys, a very, very big thank you. I know the show goes now not only to the over half a million of you follow me every week, but the podcast now is in over 160 countries. Our content now is on YouTube in five different languages, and really a big thank you for all the support to all of you, especially for the support for my latest book, the Book of Crypto, that I have a copy for those of you watching on YouTube, that became not only a bestseller, but also the #1 new release globally in financial services on Amazon. So guys, really big thank you from that perspective. And today the show is a very special one. I think for those of you who have been listening for some time, I've launched a series called the Deep Dive series, where we try to go in depth in some of the digital assets that we have in the market. We had in the past Algorand, Avalanche, Tezos, Chainlink, and many others. And today we're really going to focus on Solana. And we're going to go deep dive in Solana. We'll start with a bit of an intro for those of you who may not be very familiar, but then we'll go deep and discuss some of the latest developments that happen at Solana and what is the outlook as well. And hopefully by the end of this show, you guys will have a good idea of what Solana is and what the ecosystem is from that perspective. And to do this, we have Mr. Austin Federa, who is the head of communications at the Solana Foundation. And by the way, before I ask Austin to talk about a bit about himself, one thing you may not know about Austin is, in addition to his role he has as head of comms at the Solana Foundation, which is a quite important role, as you all know, he's a massive fan of photography on the side and rock climbing. So here we go. I love it that people in crypto have other hobbies that are so physical and also at the same time very artistic. Austin, welcome to the Future of Money podcast.
Hey, glad to be here. And, they might sound like interesting hobbies, but I'm pretty sure it's just about 85% of men in Brooklyn.
Oh, man. Don't get me started about Brooklyn. There's a lot of stuff we could talk about from that perspective. But great to have you on the show, Austin. Before we talk about Solana, I want to do a deep dive. But I think could you maybe share with the audience a bit more about yourself, really, and how you ended up being at the head of comms of Solana. And I think a bit of your background as well, because you have a very interesting background from your journalism days to today.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that the head of comms at Solana Foundation was pretty accidental in a way, right? So my first experience in crypto from like an employment standpoint was like late 2017. I moved to New York. I got a job at a fintech company that was trying to pivot into building something on blockchain. Failed, went out of business like 2 months later. But like that was, when you're forced to they're basically trying to do a borrow lend token on Ethereum, like back before anyone had branded anything DeFi or anyone really know what we were doing in this space from that perspective. And that was a fun one because like when you're forced to do something for work, you have to sit down and see like, how could this technology actually be applied to solve this problem that this company's having? And back in 2017, like I was not a big proponent of blockchain at all. I was like, this was when the Bitcoin was running up to like $18,000. So like, there's nothing fundamentally behind this run up. It's all going to crash. Like the stuff you hear constantly from folks who are crypto skeptics, that also have a lot of merit to them, right? Like Bitcoin did crash. It went from 18 to like 3.5K, right? And like those changes and those moments in the space, you kind of are like, there's two options. Either galvanizes you to say like, this was all a fraud from the beginning, or you look at it and you go like, okay, cyclical cycles happen, like, but fundamentally, is there something here that's going to bring it back for the next cycle? And so my experience working with the Ethereum protocol and building an ERC20 token that, again, never went anywhere, but was a fun experience, really got me to see the potential of smart contracts in a way that separated it from the price. I would say one of the worst parts about crypto is that there's a token price, and that's the first thing anyone looks at when they join the space. I don't think anyone looks at like a Tesla and they're like, I'm going to evaluate this car based on how the stock has done. But like for some reason, that's how everyone looks at crypto, right? They're like, oh, like, is Solana a good protocol? Well, let's look at the price, look at the chart. It's like that's not the way to evaluate this stuff. And I think if you looked at every other product in the world from a perspective of like, okay, but how is the return on the investment of the stock done? The kinds of things you'd buy would be very different than the kinds of things you actually enjoy and think are worth building on. So that was kind of the original start of it. I went off and ran marketing for Republic and launched Republic Crypto. Republic was an offshoot of AngelList that was basically an investment platform for non-accredited investors. We did a bunch of like massively successful token sales like Props and Whitnet, if you remember those guys that went nowhere for the most part. So, but that was kind of that like 2018 time when like new projects were launching every day. Everyone wanted to build a new L1, like token curated registries were a big thing everyone was talking about, that kind of space. And then went off to work for a blockchain infrastructure company, and then eventually ended up working for Bison Trails, doing product marketing for them up until their acquisition by Coinbase. At that point, jumped over to work for Solana, and that was largely because, my place at Bison Trails, I've been talking with. So Bison Trails is a blockchain infrastructure provider, which is now Coinbase Cloud. They got acquired, and they kind of became an internal division there. And the other piece of that like came up was pretty much the ability to work with tons of different protocols, right? Bison Trails supported pretty much every proof of stake network out there at the time. And so my experience working with all these different folks at Polkadot, and I worked on a bunch of the ETH2 infrastructure at Bison Trails, I never thought I would end up working for Solana. And quite frankly, that's because no one at Bison Trails was really talking to folks at Solana, because Solana was a very young network at the time. Staking rewards weren't live. The mainnet had only been live for maybe 9 months at that point. And so, it wasn't really on my list of places to go interview at and try and work for. But two folks I worked with at Republic had recently joined Solana Labs, and were like, "Hey, you should check this out. The tech is really solid. I think there's some strong potential here for this to be a cool place." So I joined in January of 21, and I've been here ever since.
The rest is history. That's very interesting. And I think this is interesting. Always have everybody has a different story how they ended up in crypto, and also often various protocols as well. So super interesting. Let's now start really diving into the Solana ecosystem, right? I think a lot of listeners may be familiar with Solana, but and my last book that I have here. By the way, for those of you watching this on YouTube, I think this is the first ever video recording I've ever done where I'm not wearing a shirt or a tie. But definitely shirts. I mean, t-shirt here. But for those of you in my book, obviously I cover Solana.
Yeah, he's got a shirt on, just to be clear.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, sorry, I'm wearing a shirt, not a dress shirt. Maybe actually a t-shirt, but not a dress shirt. Thanks for the clarification. That's why you need people from a communications perspective. But obviously, can you maybe for our audience, Austin, explain maybe in a minute, how is Solana different from other layer ones we're seeing out there, right? There's obviously the whole consensus mechanism with proof of history. There's obviously speed. There's the fees. But how right now is Solana, when you guys pitching the elevator pitch of Solana, what is the pitch of how is it different from other layer ones out there? And then we'll talk about some of the latest updates on the network.
Yeah, certainly. So at the most kind of simple level, Solana is a thesis that you can make a really fast and really efficient layer one blockchain that doesn't rely on sharding. And so, sharding, for those of you who are not familiar, it's basically a parallelization of the blockchain. You basically have parallel copies of the blockchain that are running at the same time, and that allows you to do horizontal scaling of the network. It comes with a few specific downsides, though. So one of the biggest things is something called composability. And composability is the idea that two different programs that exist in the same global state, the same memory space, for lack of a better term, on a network, can establish trust and communication with one each other directly. So if you're familiar with Ethereum 1 today, or we call it Ethereum 1, Ethereum 2, Ethereum Upgrade, Ethereum Merge, we change the name every few years, it feels like, but the Ethereum that you use today on Ethereum mainnet, that is 14 transactions per second or so, but it's one global state. So what does that mean? You can borrow against a balance in one DeFi application from a totally different DeFi application, because those two contracts can establish trust because they exist in the same memory space, for lack of a better term. Most of the scaling solutions, all the scaling solutions out there, apart from Solana, create fractured states. And this is true of Ethereum 2 as well. If you've heard about the sort of the work going on with Ethereum 2, not the merge, but the sort of idea of the surge, which is these data shards that are going to be added soon, somewhere in the next year or two. That is a system where you basically have fractured state. So each shard needs to sync up with the other shards over a certain period of time. Right? We're getting a little technical here, but fundamentally what we're talking about is that you have to go through a bridge. Moving from one shard to another is functionally the same thing as bridging from, one blockchain to another blockchain. they're kind of separate blockchains that all just run in the same VM space. And so what that means is you sacrifice composability. Solana is built on a different philosophy, which is basically that we can actually create a very fast, very performant blockchain that exists in one global state. And so when things exist in one global state, you have the same advantages of composability that you have on Ethereum, but you have, many thousands of transactions per second of capacity. So the cost of transactions can be lower, the speed can be higher, the finality can be faster, and you can build different kinds of things on Solana than you can build on Ethereum today. To do this, though, Solana is running on a different underlying architecture. It's not Ethereum virtual machine compatible. Most new blockchains in the world are EVM compatible. If you look at sort of, Avalanche or, Polygon or something along those lines, those are all built with EVM as if not the only function, the primary, like an Avalanche, they do support different virtual machines, but EVM is the one that has traction because that's, I don't mean this in a negative way, but you can copy paste your code from Ethereum and it will run on BSC, it'll run on Avalanche, it'll run on Polygon. And that's the way that they've chosen to grow and scale. Solana runs on something called the SVM, the Solana virtual machine, which is a different implementation structure of what a virtual machine could look like for a blockchain. It's a much more modern design, and it has certain advantages that enable it to be faster and have higher throughput. However, it doesn't inherit all the awesome tooling that already exists in the EVM world. So building stuff on Solana is a little bit harder than building it on the Ethereum network today or anything that's EVM compatible. But the trade-off is you can do things you can't do through EVM.
What are some of the examples, actually? Because we talked a couple of things you mentioned. I want to go zoom in, right? We'll talk about sharding, about composability. I think this is important. Also, composability. It's not the DeFi composability. It's that kind of layer one universe composability that you're referring to. We'll talk about that in a second as well. But on the EVM compatibility, because this is obviously an important topic, and as you mentioned, that's obviously often a big selling point for other layer ones that they're able to leverage this EVM compatibility. From a Solana perspective, you guys believe that there are some attributes that being on a Solana layer one outweigh some of the downside of not being EVM compatible, especially from a community adoption perspective. Can you give us some examples of what are some of these things that give an outsized advantage to Solana and compared to the EVM compatibility?
Yeah, so one of these classic examples is Serum. So Serum is an on-chain central limit order book built on Solana. It's a decentralized order book, but it's called central limit order book not because it's centralized, but because it has a mechanism called the central clearinghouse, basically, where instead of working from an AMM perspective, which is what Uniswap and most of the DeFi applications are, and the rest of blockchains, it runs on an order book. And order books are the same mechanisms that like the New York Stock Exchange, and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange are built on. And they're much more capital efficient and advanced systems of actually fulfilling and matching orders as opposed to an automatic market making system. And so that's an example of something that there are not order book systems that exist on EVM chains, partially because of the difficulties of building them through EVM.
But then in that case, though, I mean, wouldn't the reason they're not able to build a Serum on a layer one is just basically could you use scalability, which is something, is that the main reason? Or I mean, why do you think Serum could not be built on it?
Yeah, so part of the power of the Solana virtual machine is that non-overlapping transactions are processed in parallel, right? So with EVM, it's especially on Ethereum, everything is in order. Even if you and I are trading two tokens back and forth and, two of your friends are trading tokens, technically those transactions can occur at the same time because they're non-overlapping. There's no actual reason the blockchain shouldn't be able to compute both of those and validate both of those simultaneously. So the Solana EVM being massively paralleled like that means that things like central limit order books are much easier to build because it doesn't have to go through one central choke point, which is basically an in-order operation. So there are some folks like Monad is a new blockchain system that's doing out-of-order EVM for non-overlapping transactions. They're very early. I think there's like 6 people working there, but it's a very interesting idea. But right now it's not possible within the EVM programming environments.
And on the sharding, for example, and as you mentioned, when we're talking about a lot of the layer 2 solutions on Ethereum right now, and even you can argue to a certain extent with even Bitcoin Lightning as well, right? I mean, a lot of these things are being built as a layer 2 solutions now. Let's focus on Ethereum, for example. One of the arguments that the Ethereum community would give is actually you don't need every transaction to be on layer 1. And there's maybe some arguments on the privacy side as well that you can say, you know what, some of the transactions we're having on layer 2, we don't want them to be on layer 1. And to some extent, the same argument could be made for Lightning, for example, on a Bitcoin network, right? On that perspective, right? Is there any downside, you think, from your opinion, of having all the transactions on the layer 1, or again, that you think that the fact that it's everything happening on the main layer 1 outweighs any potential downside?
So I would say that there's two things that are often conflated in this conversation. The first is that you can't have privacy on an L1. So there's things like Elusive, which are running, or even like Tornado Cash, right? Tornado Cash does not run on an L2. Tornado Cash just runs on plain old Ethereum, and that is a privacy layer that's built on top of it. So you can definitely have confidential transactions and private transactions, and even ZK EVMs that exist on an L1 without relying on an L2. The other piece there is, the L2 should be the last place that you go to scale, right? That like the path to scaling is to make the base layer as fast as humanly possible. And if that can't support the needs, then you look to offload transactions. I think it's kind of strange that the original design of ETH2 did include multiple execution shards, that there was going to be EVM execution on the shards. They moved to a data-only sharding model, so it has to have rollups and L2 solutions on top of it now. But I think that the goal there really should be to build the fastest base-level infrastructure and then, as needed, offload things on top of it. I will say, though, that there's a really kind of important question, which is like, does your application-specific sidechain, does it actually require a validator network? I think most of the time the answer is no. It's done mostly for theater. So if you take a hypothetical example where you have Bank of America chain, right, which let's just say is a roll-up or an L2 built on Ethereum or built on Solana, that is still essentially controlled. Or EA Games chain would be another example of this, right? Both of those examples are centrally controlled entities. Even if they're building stuff on the blockchain, if Bank of America is hacked, it's going to pause the chain, it's going to rewind the chain, and it's going to fix the hack, right? That's like the way a centralized entity would work, the same way that if Bank of America, the corporate entity, is hacked, it's going to do that exact same thing. You can also look at the same thing for like an EA Games, or like, if there's Call of Duty suddenly on chain and all the items are NFTs and it's running on like a Call of Duty specific sidechain, that is still a centrally controlled entity. And even if you went into kind of a more extreme example where you're looking at like what happened with like Akala and AUSD, if there's a big enough hack and the pool of interest is small enough, the community is going to vote to rewind the chain history, right? There's no question about it, right? Like if Uniswap is hacked on Ethereum, and let's just say there's $500 million bled out of it, I don't think the global Ethereum community is going to say, well, let's rewrite history and make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, not anymore, that's for sure.
Not anymore, right? I mean, sure, that 2017 is a different story, right? Or whatever that was, right? With ETH Classic and that whole mess. But the place we're at now is that there's a diverse enough set of interests building on Ethereum that they're not going to compromise the values of the chain to fix a bug in one program. And when you start getting into the realm of application-specific sidechains or L2s that are designed for one application or a few applications, you lose that diversity of security, for lack of a better term. If the community is voting to rewind the chain to fix a hack, there's no reason from the perspective of OFAC that they can't vote to just rewind the transaction OFAC wants them to censor either, right? We get to a place where rewinding the chain for any reason is not morally good or morally bad. It's something that's technically possible, and that the community's proven it's possible to do. So at that point, why would, from the government's perspective, why would you not comply with a sanction order? You've already shown that you're technically capable of complying with it. How is this any different than when you voted to fix a hack in a protocol? And so from that perspective, if you look at like, what is the approach to off-chain scaling? I don't know if you need validator networks. I don't know if you need to build the thing as a proper L2, or if you can do something a little bit different, which is basically the thing that like a bunch of engineers at Solana Foundation and Metaplex have been building, which are ways to basically create Merkle trees off of the L1. And that doesn't require a whole additional validator network. It doesn't require a token. Like there's a bunch of sort of decentralization theater that I think goes into application-specific sidechains right now that if we really squint and look at it, it's not particularly intellectually honest at this point. And maybe there's a path for it to get that way. But, again, if you're building a roll up, or you're building a side chain for one specific client or one specific application, you've already sort of gotten rid of some of the major censorship resistance protections that you expect to have in the layer one.
Interesting. I think your idea of rolling back a transaction, I think you're right that it's going to be very difficult at the stage where crypto is right now, and it's going to be very interesting on that side. I'm not sure about the argument that was saying that yes, we can have privacy on layer ones. Yeah, with Tornado Cash, I think pretty much any transaction now that touches Tornado Cash, or I mean, at least before it got into the recent events, and regardless of your views of Tornado Cash, but at least now these transactions are flagged, right? And if you try to move it to any regulated exchange, it'll flag that this passed through to a certain extent.
Yeah, but privacy is always a function of anonymity, which is always a function of volume, right? One of my favorite stories was when I was working in Boston as like an intern at a news organization there.
Yeah, I saw the Boston Globe, which I was watching a movie recently about it as well. So there you go. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Boston Globe was a really fun place to be. But some student at Harvard called in a bomb threat during the exams because they didn't want to take their exam, right? They wanted more time or whatever. Well, turns out there were only 2 active Tor connections going on at Harvard's network at that time, and one was a professor teaching a class about like computer cryptography, and the other was this kid who called in a bomb scare. So even though he was running through a 100% privacy guaranteed routing system, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, yeah, if the only people using Tornado Cash are North Korea and like a small group of like Ethereum diehards, it's going to be pretty hard to censor it. But like US dollars are a great example of this, right? US dollars all have serial numbers on them. They all technically could be tracked and tagged, but like they're the preferred currency of money launderers and drug dealers, because there's safety in numbers, right? And you can't, there's enough US dollar transactions, you're not going to stick out like a sore thumb. The problem with Tornado Cash, again, apart from what you think about it, is that it never had a high enough volume and never had enough normie uses to overcome its perceptions. The same way that in the really early days of the internet, people were like, terrorists are going to communicate on this thing. It's like, yeah, probably, but like, it's a net gain to society. So like, what are we going to do? Shut off the internet to prevent like one terrorist attack? That doesn't seem like a good trade-off.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Basically, if everybody was using Tornado Cash, would actually be tracing it easier, more difficult. We're having some of the traceability firms on the show soon as well. I think that's one question I should ask them in due course. But I want to come back to the layer one element you mentioned. Right? Obviously, there's been a lot of good things on Solana. And by the way, for the full disclosure, I own Solana. So I think normally I make all these disclosures at the beginning of the show. We're not giving any investment advice. And as part of a crypto portfolio, I also own Solana. But obviously, this year was a difficult year. With Solana, I think there was over a dozen outrages already. First of all, what do you think is causing it? Not on a technical side, but do you think that the fact that the design of having everything on a layer one could be one of the reasons we're having some of these events?
No, so I want to go through a few things. The first is like we got to distinguish between outages and periods of degraded performance, right? So there's been 4 outages, which is definitely too many, but an outage is defined as when the blockchain fails to reach consensus and requires some amount of manual intervention. Congestion is bad for a user experience. Congestion is more akin to like the Bored Ape Yacht Club airdrop, and gas fees on Ethereum go up to $3,500 a transaction, right? Congestion is a bad user experience, but the network is still running and decentralized and, all that kind of process there. But yes, let's get into it because there are a lot of really important questions to kind of address throughout this.
So let's talk a lot about congestion. You're absolutely right. Sorry, I should have clarified the question. It's congestion. Let's talk about the outrages. I think that's more important from audience perspective. I mean, what do you think is the negative impact, if any, on the Solana network? And do you think actually this is part of building a network, right? I mean, we're kind of building the future of finance. These things are just meant to happen from that perspective. By the way, in the same way that we had some of these negative situations, whether we believe the hard fork of Ethereum in 2017 or other events happened, what's your view on these outages and how does you guys want to deal with this from that perspective?
Yeah. So, one of the interesting things to talk about through this whole process is like, what is the ethos of a network that's appropriate for different phases, right? So right now, Solana mainnet beta is called beta because there are key features missing from the network design, right? This is something if you go to solana.com/upgrades, there's some information there about that. There's There's local fee markets, which are coming, which you can dig into because that's a pretty interesting topic. There's Quick, which is a new networking technology. And there's basically stake-weighted QoS, which is a system to make sure that transactions can always land if they come from certain sources, right? Which is basically like a stake-weighted system. That being said, the ethos of the network has always been to build quickly and to test in production as much as possible. And so if you look at the history of Solana, the mainnet launched in March of 2020. Now, pretty bad time to launch a mainnet in retrospect, right? When you talk about the global pandemic hitting and, crypto crashed and it was like, well, we got to launch this thing or we're never going to launch this thing. So get it out the door. But that process, if you look between March of 2020 and now, the network's done over 100 billion transactions across it. Like the entire existence of Solana has come up during the ETH2 testnet phase, right? And so it went from zero and not existing to being, the most widely used blockchain today within that period of time. There's more transactions that go through the network and there's more users on the network than any other layer 1 or layer 2 blockchain today.
So on that point, right? So you're saying there's more transactions on Solana than there are, let's say, on Ethereum and or others?
Yes. In terms of users too, right? User activity on Solana is higher than any other layer 1 or layer 2 network. So that comes with that hyper growth comes with trade-offs, right? Every time you order of magnitude 1 or 2 up a system, there's going to be something in that system that breaks that you were anticipating breaking. And so, the Ethereum network, if you look at the early days of it, it suffered a lot of the same types of problems of scale that Solana has been suffering. The difference is that like Solana's speedrunning the thing because when Ethereum launched, it had the luxury of no one really knowing what it was for the first few years. And so that ability to build and test was a huge sort of advantage to the perception of the network. Now, there's been huge amounts of investments made in Solana's robustness, and it is really top priority from network engineers across the ecosystem to live up to the uptime that users expect from the network, right? There's been about 30 hours of downtime in total in 2022, which is too much. That being said, there is a whole new independent team building out a second validator client implementation for the Solana network. This is the first network after Ethereum to get a second validator client implementation.
That's a Jump crypto story, right? That's with the Fire Dancer, the whole
yes, this is Fire Dancer.
Yeah. Actually, also, can you give a bit of a quick summary on that for our audience? Because I think many people are not aware of that development, which I think is quite important, actually.
Yeah, totally. So, the validator client is basically the software packages that a validator runs, right? So if you want to run a Solana node or Ethereum node, you download some software from somewhere, and that is a validator software package. Today, the client developed by Solana Labs is built almost exclusively in Rust, which is a really high-performant programming language, which is awesome, but it's one implementation of the code base. And so that means that if there's a bug in one piece of the code base that can damage the network, it will damage every node on the network because there's one implementation of the client. This is true for Cardano, for Avalanche, for Polkadot, for every other proof-of-stake blockchain out there except Ethereum. Ethereum has, I think, 4 different validator clients right now for the ETH proof-of-stake network, which means the odds of there being, and they're built on different dependency trees. So the odds of there being a bug in one of them that is also in all of the rest of them is very low. Now, it can still happen if it's an architectural design bug. Basically, like, it's supposed to process the transaction one way and someone's found a way to exploit that transaction pipeline. That sort of bug can still exist. But the sort of like either supply chain attack or just like this library broke, or doesn't work as expected piece of thing, that is deeply mitigated by having multiple implementations of the network. And so what Jump is building with this will not only increase the throughput and capacity of the network because they're going to be contributing a lot of those changes back to the labs code base, but it's built on a different dependency tree. So the odds of there being the same bug in the Rust implementation as the C++ implementation are very low. So there's 2 things here. One is that for major operators on the network, they will probably run both validator client instances side by side, because that's exactly what happens on Ethereum world. Like, I'm sure Coinbase and Binance and all those guys are running, at least 2 different versions of validator clients at the same time to make sure that if there is a bug, they remain online and up and continue to process transactions. So I think you'll see the same thing happen with the Solana ecosystem too, which will mean basically greater resiliency and redundancy for the network.
This episode is brought to you by ACX. Do you work at a crypto company and looking at scaling your customer support function while reducing cost? Or looking at improving your community management? Or even looking at support for account opening, KYC checks, or client remediation? Well, ACX can help. ACX is the world's first specialized crypto customer support, compliance support, and community management outsource provider. ACX enables crypto platforms to offer 24/7 crypto-specialized customer support and community management to their clients in multiple languages, including English, Russian, Turkish, Arabic, Spanish, and French, by leveraging dedicated staff that are 100% advanced crypto trained and multilingual. Find out more at acxinternational.com. Make sure to also check out their annual crypto customer support report, where they independently analyze the customer support levels of 30 crypto platforms globally. Now, back to the show. I think it's interesting because maybe you also, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, Austin, but I think obviously Solana was built on Rust, which by the way, I think you guys made Rust sexy again, I think from a Solana perspective. And then there was, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the new one is built on C++, right? So the whole new
yes, that's correct.
That is coming up. So I think it's going to be very
I wouldn't say the new one, but the second one.
Well, let's say, sorry. Actually, good correction. It's the second one that's coming up. A couple other topics, we're already running out of time, but I want to go to two topics I think I want to really address with you. One of them is the NFTs, right? So it's been very interesting for me when I see a lot of people within the NFT community. I met actually quite a few. There are diehard Solana NFT community, advocates and believers. What are you guys seeing on the NFT perspective? And and share us what kind of activity you're seeing on the NFT side, and what do you think could be the future outlook of NFTs on the Solana network?
Yeah, so this is kind of a crazy one because this time last year, we just seen our first breakout NFT project on Solana, which was the Degenerate Ape Academy. And then a bunch of successful projects followed after that. But this work all came out of work that the foundation funded to create something called Metaplex. And it was the source code that ended up becoming Metaplex, which was a new implementation of how to conceive of NFTs. And so for most blockchains out there, they're basically taking the ERC 721 spec and they're copying it. They're basically saying like, this thing, we're going to build an identical implementation of it on Cardano or on Avalanche or on whatever, Polygon. What really happened here is like folks building on the network sat down and they said, what are the problems with the current NFT spec? My cat just knocked something over. What are the problems with the current NFT and working from home? I tell you.
Yeah, don't worry. I have a dog. My dog, Sparky,
on Solana.
Loves to come when I'm recording podcast. He loves to come next to me, but then he starts, he barks or something. So yeah, I'm totally used to it. But sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead, Austin.
No, it's good. So the idea was to think about like, how could you build an NFT spec different, knowing the advantages in speed and throughput that you can get from the Solana network. And so what that became is things like royalties being built into the design of the contract. The ability to structure things in a different way that allow like upgradability afterwards of the contracts if the user wants to do that. All those kind of changes that go into how the NFT framework can be built. There's like People Pleaser, who's a pretty prominent artist on, used to be on Ethereum, did this really cool thing last year where you could collect a whole bunch of different NFTs and then you could mint them into one super NFT, right? Those are mechanics that you can't do on the EVM chain, mostly from partially a technical reason, but partially an affordability issue too. The other piece that's really different is, this kind of is more general Solana architecture, but when you deploy an NFT on Ethereum, you have to deploy the minting contract as well. Solana uses something called program reusability, which is basically to say that the minting program exists on chain. And if you feed it data and you pay the fee to send data through the program, it'll do the same thing every time. And so it'll mint you an NFT without you needing to deploy the contract yourself. That is a much cheaper way to mint NFTs than having to deploy that contract as well.
I think you're right, especially during the NFT surge that we're having a couple of months ago. Really, there was a massive difference between fees of transacting on NFTs on the Solana network compared to Ethereum, right? I think that's one of the things that, unfortunately, I think was kind of the bad user experience many had on the Ethereum network when they were, punting their NFTs or collecting it, whatever we're going to call it on that side. Austin, I think I need to ask you about the Solana mobile stack. I think it's such an interesting development. Can you maybe share with our audience what is the Solana mobile stack, but also actually the Android phone, the Saga, which I believe is called, And where we are, what can we expect, and what does this mean? I think for those of you interested, correct me if I'm wrong on this. I remember there was a post from Anatoly I saw on Twitter. I don't know where you guys posted now, but who was explaining kind of the background to it. And this was like last summer. This was, I think, in May or June of this year. Where are we right now with the Solana mobile stack, and where are we with Saga, and what should our listeners expect from that perspective, and what does it mean really for the future of crypto and Solana?
The Solana mobile stack is exactly what it sounds like. It's an open source stack that's designed to be integrated into the Android phones by the manufacturer that enables a few key technologies to actually be present on your mobile phone. So there's been blockchain phones tried before, but for the most part, they relied on dedicated pieces of hardware chips that had to be injected into the phone. And that makes manufacturing really expensive and makes support really expensive, all those kinds of things. So what the Solana mobile stack does is its first main innovation is something called the Seed Vault. And so Seed Vault actually stores BIP39 private keys on the secure element inside of the phone. So the secure element on the phone is the same place that if you have a fingerprint reader or Face ID, that face print or thumbprint is stored there. Your credit cards are stored there. It is the most secure part of the phone that you can get to. And then there's a secure virtual machine that runs on the chip, which basically, if you sign into your banking application using Face ID, the bank never gets to see your face. All it's doing is sending a request to this application saying like, hey, is this the person I'm supposed to unlock the phone for? And it says yes or no, right? And so that's the structure that this thing runs on as well. Now, that sort of thing has been done before. Like Samsung did a version of that, but what they didn't do is integrate it into the rest of the applications on the phone. And so there's two other components. One is we've built a robust API pipeline so that applications can request a signature from that secure element. So that's a real big change. That's something that's going to be really exciting. So something like Phantom can basically offer Ledger grade, a little bit worse than Ledger, but like the world's most secure mobile wallet you've ever thought of can now be built on a phone, right? And so the advantage there is like with a ledger, if you lose your ledger, like you should probably replace it and switch seed phrases and move it over and all that sort of thing. Same thing applies to this. If your phone gets stolen, if you give someone a year, they can probably break into the thing, right? But it means like if we really think NFTs are going to become a part of our lives, right? If I'm going to be unlocking the door to my office with an NFT, if I'm going to be going to a restaurant that's going to be asking for my reservation, if I'm going to be joining an exclusive club where like I have to show my Bored Ape to get in, we have to make these things secure enough that you can carry them with you, right? And carrying a ledger around sucks. Like I think everyone can agree that carrying a ledger around sucks. And so the point of this mobile stack is to make it more secure to bring your digital assets with you without making it harder. And that's the big trade-off is if you ask people, will they pick security or comfort? They'll always pick comfort. So we had to design something that's going to be just as comfortable and easy as using Phantom or MetaMask on your mobile device today. Right? There's also a decentralized app store that's coming with it, so you can bypass the Google and Apple fees, which I think we're all very excited about. And then there's the phone. So the phone is built by Awesome. The hardware engineer is the same hardware engineer who built the original iPad Pro, Jason Keats. He's the same guy who did the Essential phone. Really, really rock star engineering and hardware team behind that because folks at Solana Labs, no expertise in actually building a phone, right? Would never take that on without such a strong partner like that to make the thing actually possible. But it's $1,000 flagship Android phone. The specs are just in line with the latest stuff from Samsung and Google, the Pixel line, the Pixel 7 they just announced. And so we have a bunch of units in testing right now. I've been using one for about 4 months at this point as a testing device, which is great. And then we're looking at an early Q1 release of the phone.
Oh, wow. So that early. I didn't know it was coming out that quickly. So really Q1 2023, the phone that's coming out.
It'll be shipped into your door.
That's interesting. It's funny you mentioned Ledger because we had Pascal Gauthier, the CEO of Ledger, on our show really a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And actually asked him the same question. I asked him what he thinks about Saga and Solana Labs launching this. And I have to say, I mean, for those of you interested, you can listen. But he was not a big fan. One of the arguments from what I remember was obviously Solana Labs is great at software, but doesn't mean you can build hardware. Also, there's a lot of security considerations from HSM and everything. It's quite complex build out, right? Like you said, I mean, I guess you're mentioning that it's not being built by Solana Labs team, but
I would completely agree with him, right? Solana Labs should not be building hardware. Solana Labs is also not building hardware.
No, exactly. But I think it's very, very interesting developments, right? I think on the point where I think you and Pascal Gauthier from Ledger would agree is that we need the wallets that we need use on a day-to-day basis, right? From NFT to open up communities. And you're absolutely right. That balance between the user experience and security, I think it's going to be, it's $1 billion question, right? Literally, it's like, how are you going to find that right balance and how is that going to help the growth of the ecosystem, right? So very, very interesting on that perspective. Also, one last question, then I'm going to move to the fire round question, a quick one, and this is, I think, something I discuss a lot with other layer one protocols, but one of the negative complaints on the ecosystem is that there's a lot of projects, like including Solana, where Anatoly, the founder, is obviously very public. And actually, I'm very happy to see there's individuals like you who are now becoming the voice of the community and the voice of the ecosystem on that side. But we had it with Ethereum, with Vitalik, we have it with many others from Algorand, the Tezos, and others, where there was a very figurehead who was there. I mean, Cardano was a very good example with Charles Hoskinson, right? Do you guys think that's a negative? How do you think that cult of personality, for lack of a better expression, could impact layer one solutions?
So I think many ecosystems work against this, and many don't. I would say there's some that definitely don't. Like Cardano is one where there's just different decisions that have been made there. But you look at the Ethereum community, and Vitalik has never been someone who says pay attention to me. He's never the one standing up there saying here is my one and only vision for what Ethereum must be. It's here's some thoughts that I'm publishing on my blog, right? I think Anatoly does the same thing for the most part. Some of the best ideas come from the other core engineering teams. And look, there's the Solana Labs engineering team is obviously a core engineering team to the network, but Mango DAO also has a core engineering team now. The Jump team with Fire Dancer is becoming a core contributor to the network. And so one of the weird things about crypto is everyone in it demands decentralization. And then they also demand to talk to the founders, right? So, no shade on Token 2049, but they only let founders and C-level people speak at their conferences. If I was, if they reached out to me and said, hey, we really want to get Anatoly on stage to talk about Solana. And I was like, what about Kevin Bowers from Jump, who's the core, who's leading this core project to build a second validator client? They'd be like, we really need the founder of the network. And so there is this sort of thing where even the crypto native, both press and the people who work in it, they just want to talk to who they think their audience will perceive as the one in charge. And the answer is, of course, there's no one in charge, right? And that there are actually many more interesting people than Anatoly and many more interesting people than Vitalik that you can talk to. But, when the New York Times and Ezra Klein want to do an episode on Ethereum, it's Vitalik they have on their podcast. It's not, someone else who's been incredibly influential from an engineering perspective in building the network. And so I think there's a process there where society is not ready for a leaderless organization yet. We saw this with this isn't set aside the politics of it, but we saw this with Occupy Wall Street, right? Politicians had no idea how to engage with that movement because there wasn't anyone in charge they could invite into their office and have a meeting with, right? Setting aside the whole politics of the movement, leaderless organizations are very, very ineffective at engaging with legacy institutions. And so it's a long process of basically changing the minds of the people who are observing blockchain to understand that if you try and find the one person in charge, you're never going to find the one person in charge.
Exactly. I think it's going to be very interesting. I think you're right. There's this kind of people want to speak to the big boss, right? The CEO, like you said, the C-level story. But I find
even just the Minions movie.
Yeah, exactly. But hopefully, I've seen it myself when I look at the research on a lot of layer ones or talk to people. Unless you have a very charismatic or somebody who can speak about it, often you'll find a lot more information about the people who are building stuff, right? And you can get really more in depth in a lot of these topics, right? So absolutely right on that side. Also, we're completely beyond time, and my producer Alex is going to kill me right now. But I want to go through the fire round of questions. The Bell is with me here, travel with me here, and I'm going to ask you quick questions, Austin, and I want a 1 or 2 word answer. Hope you're ready.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's kick it off. Austin, if you're not in crypto, what other industry would you be in right now?
Oh, it's such a hard question. I would at this point, I would probably be working for one of the infrastructure companies or one of the large trading funds.
Here we go. You're obviously you handle communications. What is the best company you think in your perspective, non-crypto, that has excellent communications right now in the market, or one that you admire from a communications perspective?
I would say GitHub pre-acquisition.
Wow, interesting. Really, that's interesting.
Pre-acquisition.
In 10 seconds, what do you think they were doing interesting from what were they doing on a communication perspective that was interesting?
They weren't afraid to say that we're going to let hacked closed source code stay up. They were brutally honest with their audience, and you got to respect that because very few Web2 companies are honest.
Well, brings me to the other question. What do you think is the biggest mistake crypto firms are making when it comes from a comms perspective?
They think they can treat it like Web2. So many folks in Web3 who work in comms in Web3, they think they can just sort of like kind of lie or overstep the truth to their audience. But like, this is a very technical audience. Like you can't get up on stage and say Facebook didn't interfere with the elections and get away with it.
So you started your career as a journalist. If you could go back to journalism today, which media outlet would you want to work for?
God, ProPublica. They're the only ones left doing good work.
Wow, interesting.
On a national level.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
You're a climber. If you had one mountain or a place you could climb, what is the dream? What do you want to climb on that perspective?
So I'm going to give you a different answer to this. I want to take like a month or two sabbatical at some point and go somewhere and really learn to surf.
Yeah, amazing. What is your favorite movie on Netflix or YouTube series? Favorite Netflix movie or series or YouTube movie or series?
Oh, I really loved the Foundation series on Apple TV.
Oh yeah, interesting.
The Isaac Asimov adoption, I think that's been really good. For all time, come back to again and again, it's probably The West Wing.
There we go. Actually, brings me to my next question: Apple or Android? I think I know the answer here.
Today I run an iPhone, and then once Saga is released, I will definitely carry that around as a second device.
Here we go.
The iMessage lock-in is real.
Yeah, exactly. That's still part of the ecosystem, right?
Yes.
If you had to bet, is Satoshi Nakamoto a man, a woman, or what country is he or she from?
I think it's an organization of people.
Oh, interesting.
I don't think it's an individual. I think it was a small group of CS, probably students, that came together and built something.
Oh, interesting. Here we go.
If you have to give me a country, gosh, Japan?
Interesting. Oh, man. I think we could have a whole speculation show on that one as well. What is the one course you recommend students in university take today? What is the one course you recommend every student takes today?
Yeah, so I don't know if they have, I mean, they'll have this in most places. I took a really interesting course on theories of digital media. A bunch of like work with like Lev Manovich and sort of his early thinking from the late 90s on like how content moves throughout digital and social spaces. It's the most important thing you can do if you're looking at marketing or comms or product.
Here we go.
Don't do a strategic communications major. Do something in the liberal arts and you'll figure the rest out later.
Well, I think a lot of students are either very happy or very sad to hear this right now. It actually brings me to my other question is, would you recommend anybody starting off and wants to start in journalism, should they go into journalism or no, as a starting for their career?
So I did not go to journalism school. I don't think it's necessary at all. I think that the thing that most of journalism is not learning the practice and trade of journalism. There's a little bit of like a cult of access there. What it's really about is learning how to think about things and learning how to understand them fairly quickly, because you'll have to go from zero to like, I can write a story on this thing in like 72 hours. And that is a process of learning and just becoming good at learning. I would say that most journalism schools focus too much on teaching you the technicals. The same way, my same criticism was like, don't do a business major undergraduate unless you want to become an accountant. Like, go to undergraduate to learn how to think. Then if you really need to do a master's, most people don't need to do a master's. Most people who are going to an in-person college should be doing a liberal arts degree. And if you're not doing a liberal arts degree, you can probably learn it online for like a 10th the price.
Yeah, I think, there's a big learning experience that universities will need to change, but that's a whole different podcast show as well. You're in Brooklyn. Favorite thing to do in Brooklyn?
Oh, I love Brooklyn. Everything's great here. Gosh, what's my favorite thing to do? I don't know. Everything is just fantastic. There's so many good restaurants. Love the ferry system. It's great.
Man, and Mr. Austin Federa, to close it off today, from Head of Comms from the Solana Foundation. That's Austin. If you could have lunch or dinner with one person, dead or alive, lunch or dinner with one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
I think I might pick Alan Moore.
Who's that? Sorry,
the guy who did Watchmen and all those sort of foundational like sci-fi and comic stuff from the 60s. The more either that or you're looking at so basically the stuff he's like been thinking of and doing work on, it's not really comics, it's all like grappling with what modern society going to an industrialized form of violence did to us. Like the World War I to World War II to like Cold War legacy out of that. Like that's what all his work is about. So I think that'd be a really, really interesting person to talk to.
Love it, Austin. Thank you very much, Austin, for being on the show with us today. Where can people find you? If they want to learn more about you, how can they find you?
Twitter is great. It's Austin_Federa.
Austin_Federa. Guy, Austin, thank you very much once again for being on the show. Thank you for this deep dive. I think it was a good update for everybody on the call, on the podcast. Guys, thank you very much again for everybody listening to this. Again, if you like the show, please give us a 5-star rating. It helps really with more people discovering the show. And guys, again, a big, big, big thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the support that you've given us, not only for the book, it became bestseller, but also for the success of the show. I was getting the metrics recently for this podcast and other content literally this week from my team. And I have to say a very big thank you, guys. I really, really love you all. And I promise you continuing to create as much content as we can from every perspective. So guys, thank you very much. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of the Future Money Podcast, and see you all next time.